So what do you do? What do you do when you what do you do before you've written an argument and you have to kind of ground yourself in emotion? Doubly true if you don't know that much about the motion or you're not that immediately familiar with it. What are the questions you need to be asking yourselves to get yourself ready? Um, so that's what you want to keep in mind. That said, got a lot of comments here. We want to do some things on refutation, some things on how to write contentions, how to kind of develop a vision for where the round is going. So I will definitely discuss some of those things. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tim. I've been a debate coach for about 15 years now, and I've been coaching parliamentary debate for the last 6 years at Blind Brook High School. Lots of debate experience, mostly in parley, but also a little bit of public forum along the way. I will also say I'm primarily familiar with East Coast parley. I don't have a lot of deep knowledge on kind of on theory and how to apply theory in rounds. So just being upfront with y'all there, but hopefully nonetheless, this is a useful lecture. And I do, especially on Zoom, I will be talking for a little bit, but I also like getting some student feedback. In person lectures on Zoom just are not hearing someone speak for 30 minutes on Zoom just isn't very fun. So we're going to try to avoid that as best we can. So this is about world building, and what it is about how do you make your arguments realistic and grounded at the start of the debate. And I want to start with this. I am going to introduce to you a bad argument. I wasn't going to tell you it was a bad argument in advance, but honestly, this argument is so bad that I think I have to be upfront with you. I want you to read it and do me a favor. Start with some annotations. Just write some things down. What about this argument is bad? What about this argument just plain doesn't work? The motion is this House would mandate an economics course for all high school students. This is a possible argument. As I said, it is a bad one. Take some notes. Draw on the screen here what makes this a bad argument. All right, got some folks underlining things. All right, lots of stuff, lots of stuff. Okay, so really good stuff, here. Let's see. All right, there's a lot. Okay, so there's a lot of directions we could go with our. There's a lot of directions that we could go with our critiques here. Very clearly not a not a well warranted, motion. A couple folks wrote about links. Can someone turn their mic on and just talk about what when we say no links, what are the what's missing from how this motion how this contention is linked together?
I can explain that part. I
Go
think
for
I
it.
wrote that. I was just gonna say that like they talk about how adding this course directly leads to like a drastic decrease in mental health, but they don't actually explain like a step by step like how would adding this course like at all impact their mental health? They just like they make a statement without explaining the steps to get there, I guess.
Mm, huge problem here. Let me ask you guys a question. Do you think you could, is it possible to make the link that this debater is trying to make here? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, go for it. Go for it, Porf.
yeah, I think it would be possible. So for example, in that sentence, you adding the course to the school curriculum would add um more workload, like more time spent in school, like um less time to, sleep and like nourish yourself and and maintain your mental health.
How do other people feel?
I mean, I would say that it's possible. I don't think it'd be the strongest argument, but I'd say it's possible by just explaining how a burden kind of just like I guess how a burden is going to decrease mental health because that's kind of where like the confusion I guess appears, at least in my opinion. I want to point out something that Vic said. They mentioned how it kind of like assumes something that the motion doesn't set up, which it is true, it does assume it, but at the same time, party is about assumptions and stuff, right?
What do you mean by assumptions, Ariel? Tell us more. What's the problem? Maybe a better way of asking, what's the problem with the assumption here?
I mean, since parley is kind of like, depends on the debater and how they set up, I guess, their framing. When it comes to the assumption, that I guess it'll add sorry, my brain is braining. When it comes to the assumption that it'll add another course, I mean what Vic said does make sense. Like it's assuming that it's going to add hours, but then at the same time it really just depends on how framing goes within the round. If the government sets up and says that this is going to add another course on top of everything, then of course this argument just needs, an additional link. But if the opposition goes ahead and says, no, this framing is incorrect, it's replacing X or Y or Z, then this argument practically falls entirely, right?
And this is always something, which is something you have to be prepared for with how Gov, as op, Gov has lots of flexibility in terms of how they model the round. And Gov can create a lot of havoc for op cases by by modeling in unexpected ways. I've seen a lot of op teams just fail to adapt to that, and that's ultimately how they lose rounds. So that's which is an excellent point. I'll be I could this I'll be honest. I'm not convinced this is a great argument. Even if you get all your ducks in a row, even if you get your links properly set up, I'm not convinced. I can see how adding another AP course could add to the burden of an average high school student. I could see how adding a lot of like a full 4 years of economics courses could add to that burden. But y'all can tell me if I'm wrong. I don't know that adding one more course drastically changes my life as a high school student in any particular way. Is there anybody agree or disagree or want to say something on that?
Yeah, oh, sorry. I kind of agree, like what Ariel said, it's a lot of assumption because like you can't say that all of the students won't like to take economics in their life, or like even if they're mandated, some people might want to and some people might not. So like just saying that it's a waste of time and just like saying that it's going to change your life and make you more like decreases your mental health is kind of like a really like dragging it out.
Mm-hmm. It sounded like there was one more person who wanted to say something. We can make one more comment, then we should roll on.
That's okay. You guys can move on. She was gonna say what I was gonna say.
Yeah, and I see some folks making these points in the comments. This, believe it or not, is an argument I have heard in rounds, and I hear a lot of arguments around mental health specifically. It's become a bit of a buzzword a bit of a stock argument in parliamentary debate. Sometimes it's used well, sometimes it's used poorly. A lot of times it just and a lot of times when it's done poorly, it comes back to, is this actually grounded in the realistic experience of high school students? Is it grounded in the world that's relevant to the round? If it's not, then it's probably not going to hold water. It's probably going to collapse. Now, there's a couple points that were raised that I think could be useful. Vic brings up an interesting point. Perhaps this is an unnecessary mandate. There's also a question of, can schools adequately fund for this? Are there enough teachers that are actually competent at teaching economics that we could make this mandate useful, a useful part of students' time? We'll get into this, but I would argue those are much more realistic to the world of the motion. And so they have a better shot at holding their ground as part of the debate. So this is what, and this, seeing a lot of arguments like this in my years judging debates at both the novice and varsity level is a big reason why I wanted to put together this lecture. So world building is the creation or explanation of the reality of the society we're working for in purposes of the debate. World building, also known, sometimes referred to as modeling, in fact, more often referred to as modeling, it's become a popular phrase, or growingly popular phrase in debate. It actually has its roots in the world of creative writing, of creative fiction. If you've ever read a good novel, and in particular, if you've ever read a good sci-fi and fantasy novel, these are genres that only work because the authors put a lot of time and attention into figuring out what the world is that we are trying to set up. I have long felt as debate coach that the principles of world building that you can be applied to debate, and in particular parliamentary debate, in a way that is super useful. My hot take is, if you run for many motions, it is to your benefit to take at least 5 minutes before you've written a single argument and do some world building. Figure out what is the world in which this motion lives, and from that world, what are the logical, plausible arguments that we can build, knowing what that world is like. That can be challenging at first, requires a little bit of imagination, but I'm going to walk you through some basic tips that I think will help. That I think will help with this. I'm going to give you some basic questions and basic ideas that you can play around with that will help you in that process. But first, some important disclaimers. Disclaimer number one: there's just no substitute for knowing stuff. So the reality of world building, the more you know about a topic, the more that you know that world, the more quickly you're going to be able to generate contentions and prep yourself for all kinds of different refutations. For my part, outside of debate, I know a lot about a couple things: American history, American politics, the history of the NBA, a little bit of music and classic rock history. You give me motions on that, I can skip past all of this because I know those worlds. I know how to write contentions on them. And this is just a reminder that for all the tips we give you about debate, there's no substitute for reading. There's no substitute for exposing yourself to a lot of different areas of knowledge around the world as best you can. That is the stuff that will prep you very well for this sort of thinking. That said, inevitably you're going to hit a motion you don't know a lot about. Most of the motions I'm going to present today, I think, are ones that everybody's going to have some background knowledge on. But if we'd like, I'll throw in some more challenging motions and see what we can do with them. And disclaimer number two: I'm a big believer that there is no silver bullet in debate. I can't give you the secret knowledge. I can't give you, I can't help you win all of your debate rounds with this one weird trick. That's just not what coaching is. But I can give you some guidelines. These are not ironclad rules, but they are some guidelines that I think, if you follow them, will be helpful. And there'll be things that you can try in your practice rounds this afternoon. So with all that in mind, what questions you should be asking depends on the context. I'm just gonna fix a quick grammar error. There we go. And I'm gonna go through some different, this is also gonna be a good excuse to talk about some different types of motions, but a few basic ones that you can ask. As soon as you get a motion, there's these are places to start your thinking. What actors are relevant to the motion? I love starting with this because it's very clear and it's very concrete, right? Who are the people affected? How are they affected? What does that effect actually look like? If you can describe that effect, you can make arguments about it on Gov. What events, what historical events or current events are relevant to the motion? Is there any additional modeling you need to do based on what those events are? In other words, are there any events that you need, before you introduce a contention to your judge, are there any events that you're going to need to talk about with them? And number three, what ideas are relevant to the motion? What ideas, what philosophical concepts are things that you need to be able to play, with? Again, if we want to talk about this, we can, but but if this is a motion that is about, that you get the sense is about equity, is about civil liberties, is about utilitarianism, everyone's favorite debate word. Well, okay, make sure you have a sense of what those ideas are and how they might play out over the course of the round. The more you debate, the more you know those ideas and are familiar with them. Vic asks, can you make up events, or is this from IRL knowledge you have of world events? Short answer, depends on the motion. If the motion is this House believes that the US should cease its funding of the war in Ukraine, you can't make stuff up. That's a big no-no. If the motion is presenting a fictional scenario, it might give you may have some flexibility to say, Judge, we'd like to fill out the picture of this scenario for us, right? Perhaps the motion is this House would choose a state college over an Ivy League university, something along those lines. You can you have some ability within reason to flesh that out. Who is this House? And what can we say about them? So these are things that we want. These are things that we want to be thinking about. So looking at taking a quick look at the time here. We'll talk about. Let's get some quick answers on this. Won't make it a big discussion, but this House would mandate an economics course for high school students. Throw out some answers for me here. What actors are relevant to this motion?
Board.
School board. All right, who else we got?
School districts,
Districts,
teachers,
econ teachers.
Students.
Students.
Now, when we say teachers, are we talking just econ teachers or any other categories of teachers?
Probably maybe the teachers, like if this economics course was shifting the schedule of some other courses, maybe those teachers.
Certainly. Fun fact, I am a certified social studies teacher in the state of New York. I am theoretically qualified to teach US history, world history, European history, geography, anthropology, sociology, psychology, and economics if I was called upon. I don't know that I don't think I would be an amazing econ teacher, but I would, I theoretically am able to do it based on my license. So this could throw some monkey wrenches into me. We got some all right. Vic points out student government who might push against this mandate. Absolutely. You can get even more creative here. State education budgets, right? State governments that would have to figure out how to get money for this. Those all become relevant actors. So let's pick one. So once you know the actors, you can pick one, two, three, or more, and make arguments around them. Make arguments around what they, who they are and what their lives are like. With students in particular, it helps to go further and be explicit and say, well, what do we know about students' lives? We know that your average high school student takes a lot of classes. We know that the average high school student probably is interested in at least some aspects of economics, maybe how to start a business, maybe how to set up a savings account, personal finance stuff. Maybe they just want to understand what the economy means and what the economy is to their lives. All of that, because once we've made all that explicit for ourselves, we can write arguments around that, and we can fill those arguments out with relevant warranting and impacting that actually feels grounded to students' lives. Now, when you get beyond that, when we get to more specific, this changes a little bit. We have some more specific questions we can ask, and this is a good time to talk about different types of motions. There's different ways that this is taught, but basically I find it's useful to break motions into these categories. The first is the one that maybe we might be most familiar with, especially if you've done public forum debate: policy motions. Policy motions are pretty much what they sound like. The government or some other governing body needs to implement a change, needs to implement some sort of policy to address some sort of situation in society. Most of these motions will start with "this House would." So this House would would guarantee housing for all individuals in the United States. This House would legalize all drugs. This House would set term limits for the Supreme Court. They are so policy motions. This is obviously the one where some kind of background knowledge is probably going to be important, probably the most important of all of these. You need to know, you're going to need to know your stuff. But there are ways that you can think about this knowledge. There are ways that you can fill gaps in your knowledge by asking the right questions. The next one are what are called actor motions. These are particularly popular in NYPDL. So this is where you get a clearly defined actor in the debate, and now you need to speak from that actor's perspective. There's again a lot of these in NYPDL debates. This House as X would make a certain choice. This House as an average student. This House as a friend would tell their girlfriend if they're cheating on them. This is a motion I've seen in NYPDL debate. This is sometimes they are scenarios. This House so one of our favorites in NYPDL land. You're in a medieval village. The mayor is a bear. No one else knows they are a bear. This House, as a villager, would tell everyone. That is an absurd scenario, but we've gotten some fun debates out of that one. So those are actor motions. Sometimes they overlap with policy motions. This House, a motion about whether North Korea should give up its nuclear weapons changes drastically depending on whether you're talking about Kim Jong-un or you're talking this House, whether this House is Kim Jong-un or whether it's just a general policy motion. So these sorts of things are worth keeping in mind with actor motions. And then finally, the third category I tend to pay attention to are analysis motions. This is generally where you receive some sort of either a statement of fact or a statement of values, and you have to critique that motion. So so this House believes that the world would be safer without nuclear weapons. There's an analysis motion. There's a lot, as you can see, there's a lot of different subcategories here, but the most common ones are these four. This House believes that, this House prefers, this House regrets, this House supports, or alternatively, this House opposes any given motion. One way or the other, they're typically presenting you with not so much a policy that needs to be implemented, but some sort of statement of facts or values or an observation about society that you now need to play with on either side. Before I go into questions that can be relevant to any of these, what questions do we have about these types of motions? Porv, what's up?
Sorry, I missed the definition of analysis motions. Do you think you would repeat that?
Sure. An analysis motion is asking you to evaluate the truth or falsehood of a statement. It's not asking you to lay out a policy so much as it's asking you to evaluate the truth of an idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Excellent. Any other questions on any of these three motions?
And then to clarify, the actor motions are just the types of motions. It's like this house would tell them like type of situation.
An actor motion specifically defines the actor whose perspective we're taking. So a policy motion may not define the actual actor. That might actually be left up to the government team to figure out. Whereas an actor motion is going to say, no, this house is blank. This house is Donald Trump. This house is this house is a college student, and then asks you to debate from that particular perspective. Does the specific Vic, I saw you raise your hand. Does the specific wording of analysis motions change a lot? Short answer, yes. I find this is the category that has the widest diversity. You can see that just in the fact that there's all these subcategories. I would say that I rarely see a motion that I'd have to think about it. I don't know if I've seen a motion that starts with anything of an analysis motion that starts with anything other than these five word choices here. The one point I will add is frequently in parliamentary debate, you'll sometimes see things like this house regrets the narrative, that, et cetera, and so forth. I can explain later how, if folks would like, why that changes the nature of the round. But for now, let me get into some types of questions you should be asking yourself this afternoon, depending on these motions. So let's start with policy and actor motions. So policy motions and actor motions, I'm grouping together here because you need, for both of these, you need to think about who is, first of all, the person who has to carry this out, the person who has to actually make a choice here. So this is often called the agent of action. Who is the agent of action who has to carry out this policy? How does their role in society affect how they carry out the act? How they're going to carry out the action? So now that's a lot to unpack. So first, who is the agent of action? I'm not going to lie, actor motions make this a little bit easier because, well, now you know the agent of action. The motion has told you, but you should take some time and figure out, what do we know about this what do we know about this agent of action? What do we know about this person or this group? What motivates them? What incentives do they have? And in particular, what are their lives like in the status quo? How are their lives going to change based on this policy? The more, and the big tip that I can give here is be concrete. What are the concrete changes, and what can we say about them, good or bad? In the case of our economics course motion, well, literally, how's my life changing as a student? I have I have one more slot that's filled in my schedule every day. I have one more slot in my schedule that's filled by a required course instead of an elective. I have one more course that I need to think about homework for. Those are concrete changes, and once we've said them out loud, we can talk about them. This is helpful, by the way, even if it's a relatively easy motion to wrap your head around. I find very often that students know things that they don't think about. They don't realize they know until I've pointed them out to them, right? So the more that you've made this stuff explicit as part of your prep, the easier it is to fold it into your contentions, fold it into your argument writing as you go through. I've got just a little bit of time left, so I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to skip a few slides so I can give you the basics on a few of these, and then answer any questions you have. This is one that I think is really useful to think about. This house would allow schools to discipline students for their social media use. This is one that I have to shout out a colleague of mine who pointed this motion out to me. There is a problem here that may not be immediately obvious. What types of schools are we talking about? Are we talking about schools in relatively liberal parts of the country or relatively conservative parts of the country? How might a more conservative school, say one that's less likely to be openly tolerant of LGBT folks, how are they going to interpret this motion in a way that's actively harmful to students? That when you've thought through those world building details, suddenly you've got yourself a really compelling and high impact opposition argument. Now, obviously, and of course, on the gov side, if you've thought that through, well, you can start to think about, well, how are we, you can start to ask, well, how are we defining this house in a way that makes it a lot easier to have the argument I want to have? So for policy or actor motions, really defining who's carrying out the action, who is being affected by the action, and what are their day-to-day lives like in concrete terms. Once you've told that story to yourself, you can start writing contentions that fold in those details in a way that's going to be really compelling to your audience. Analysis motions, well, what are we analyzing? Is this a factual reality or is this a moral value? Is this a fact on the ground? So are we evaluating whether Ukraine has a shot of winning the war with Russia? Are we evaluating whether democracy is a principle that we want to uphold in a certain context? Those are big, weighty questions. We want to define them specifically. What are the rules or the customs or the traditions of the world in which we are operating? So how does the world in which this motion exists, how does this world work? If we're laying out, if a motion has something to do with how a government works, well, what are the laws of that government? If it's something about the economy, well, what do we know about how an economy functions? Those are really important. A basic thing about debate is that a motion is normally asking you to disagree with the status quo. Well, before we can disagree with the status quo, let's define it. Let's tell a story about it. How does it work? Who is affected positively, negatively, or both by this motion? So I had some examples here, but we've only got about 2 minutes left. And I want to give at least a little, I want to make sure I've given some time for any question. Let me take these last few minutes then and ask, what are some questions that y'all have?
I was gonna ask about like the world building aspect. You talk a lot about like how you should be like doing this, but do you have like a preferred structure? Like, are you doing this in your top of case? Are you doing this in the like specific contentions? Like, where do you suggest doing this?
So first I will say that when prepping, I would argue that for most motions, this ought to be the first thing that you do. Maybe if you really know a lot about the motion, go straight into contentions. But honestly, even if you know a lot about the motion, start prepping this right at the beginning. As to Where it fits in your case, I would recommend, I tend to recommend that this should appear somewhere in top of case. So generally speaking, if you, when you present, for example, a framework for a debate, you typically start a framework by presenting observations. So I would start by saying, Judge, let's set up a few observations for how the for how the real world works. That can then justify the framework that you make. Ideally, these observations are things that probably are going to be hard for people to disagree with. They give which will give them a lot of credibility for what give a lot of credibility to the framework that you're asking. Let's see. Here, Vic, I'm sorry, I think you had a question. Oh wait, no, never mind. Porv, so once asking one of these questions, would you come up with multiple answers and choose the one that supports your argument most? How do you answer questions that don't have definite answers? Both really good questions. I would say you set up how the world works, and then you focus on those details that are going to be compelling as part of your contention. So you figure out what are the details that fit most neatly into the arguments I need to present for Gov or Op. I find it's helpful to actually start with the assumption that you're trying as best you can to make neutral descriptions of the world. This will allow you to then make contentions that are plausible to that world.